Hi, and welcome to the TCI What We Need Spotlight interview series. We sincerely thank you for being available for this session and giving us your time. I would now request you to please tell us your name, where do you live, and what do you do?
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me to take part. My name is Liz Brosnan. I'm Irish, I'm based in Ireland, and I'm based in the west of Ireland in a wonderful little city called Galway, which is on Galway Bay, and it's very close to the coast, so it's wonderful. And I'm currently in my mum's house, so which is in the Midlands and supposed to be the coldest part of the country, but I'm here because I was doing something earlier this morning. So the second part of the question was it what do I do? Or
What do you
okay.
make?
Well, for the last 20 years, I've been active in mental health advocacy, trying to improve mental health services. As part of that, I got an opportunity to do a PhD, and I looked at the whole dynamics, the politics of service user involvement. That's what we were called then. So I'd been active, so I did the PhD and I worked for a few people on projects in universities as postdocs, and then most recently in one looking at how the CRPD has affected mental health laws or not. But as from last week, I'm unemployed again, so I have more time to be voluntary or not, because this work never ends. I had a chance to reflect on the work recently, and many things have changed. Even the language has changed. I mean, halfway during that period when the CRPD began to be talked, convention began to be discussed, we became known as people with psychosocial disabilities, but that hasn't really caught on. I mean, some people I like the psychosocial part because we're always trying to find words. So I'm most comfortable with the identity of a survivor researcher because that has very strong links to MAD studies. And if I'm talking in academia, I love the concept of MAD scholarship, MAD studies. I love the idea. David Revel talks about the high knowledge crazies, and definitely and that. Lately, I know there's an awful lot of people speaking about lived experience. And so a lot of our work in Ireland, we were recovery experts, incorporated the experts by experience into our title. And it's actually the title of the DPO that I've been very involved with for over 12 years. So I can continue and talk about that because I think it relates to what we're talking about today. Recovery experts by experience grew out of advocacy work and campaigning that was happening by Amnesty International. They had a focus on Irish mental health laws, the situation, because it was, still is, but it was very, the services are very institutionalized based. And even though there's been a move, there's definitely been a strong move and a lot of talk about deinstitutionalization. I mean, that was very a key theme in our first mental health policy, which was back in 1984. I mean, I remember that time when they were talking about closing the institutions and bringing people back into the community. And then we had a national policy called Share Vision for Change in 2006. And coincidentally, that coincided with our mental health law, the one that we've been advocating a lot to try and change. So, sorry, in 2006, we had both the Sharing the Vision and the implementation of the Mental Health Act of 2001, which provided for a tribunal review of people's detention. So both those that period of time did see a big shift in the legal discourse around recovery became a big thing, but yet the voice of the service user, the people directly experiencing services, and also their family members, supporters, the people who love them, want to support them, they were very much included, you know, in some kind of nominal way, like there might be a meeting to ask people what they thought about it. But my opinion is that if people don't understand the context, and especially if they don't know that there could be an alternative, that then you know, the consultation generally tends to maybe almost rubber stamp the document that's been produced, that they've been given to comment on. So in many ways, that kind of consultation is very, well, it's a rubber stamping exercises. So just to say briefly, some people were saying how wonderful it was that we had those tribunals, that Mental Health Act. And the only thing that was progressive about it is that the tribunals, unlike in UK and many other places, the tribunals were actually triggered automatically by once somebody was detained against their will. So they didn't have to request tribunal review of their detention. I think that's the only positive thing about that 2001/2006. They introduced the tribunals in 2006. So for a while I was actually on the panel for lay members of tribunals, so I saw a lot of it from that side. I should say, maybe just in terms of my own history, I was detained several times under the old act, you know, before we had an act which allowed, essentially there was no review, no oversight of people's detention, and somebody could be detained for years and years and years without any review. So I was detained under the old act several times in the 80s and 90s, until I kind of learned, well, if you accept and you go in voluntarily, well, then you won't be, if you go in voluntarily, you won't be involuntarily detained unless you try to leave against medical advice, in which case you can be detained again. So, and in a way, that's, even though we have, with the act, we have stronger protections now, they don't necessarily mean much in terms of safeguarding human rights, because somebody can be redesignated and a different form fill in, and then another consultant can be invited in to say this person needs to be detained or this person needs ECT, and then somebody has no recourse against that, unless they go and have the resources to take it to judicial review. But you know, and say a legal advocate would be is appointed under the 2001 Act to allow people to be to have legal support, but it's not necessarily. Sometimes, if one was cynical, you can see that solicitors are making a lot of money out of taking cases and making a name for themselves, and not necessarily in, you know, for the best outcome for the patient. I'm wondering, am I rambling a bit, or do you want me to direct me? Okay. So back to the amnesty part. Well, in that, we were very closely involved with Amnesty's work to try and improve services, improve the rights of people within the services, people affected by mental health services. And so I learned a lot, personally, I learned a lot about campaigning and advocacy, and also the CRPD, because at that time the CRPD was being discussed a lot. So we were a group of service users. This was before, you know, I started my PhD or anything. or sorry, it was during the time I started my PhD. The Amnesty campaign was ongoing, or they got a lot of funding. So it started in 2006, and then they got a lot of funding. Sorry, I got involved with, learned about it in 2006, and then they got, philanthropic grant to do work in 2008. So they had 4 years where we worked with them and in campaigning and lobbying, and media campaigns, and also they funded a citizens jury. And so the citizens jury, sorry, I'm just checking my phone because I forgot to turn the screen saver off. So just to say it, there's a centre in the University of Galway, which has been very involved in the CRPD scholarship knowledge. It's the Centre for Disability Law, and they partnered up with Amnesty to support a citizens jury, and that was really significant because that brought a lot of other people with lived experience into the whole discussion and debate. And and in a sense, the people who joined recovery experts by experience have our work has been shaped by the experience of the people who have come in. So we have one woman who received ECT against her will several times, and so that's been a real focus of our work, because what we've been trying to ensure is that the current laws, and this is where it gets complicated, because there's two laws. One actually just passed last night. It was amended, and that's the law that is quite, I suppose, unique. It's definitely been influenced by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, because we replaced the 18, I can't remember what year in the 1800s, but it was the Lunacy Act. So just last night they've updated legislation that aims to support people with decision making. So that's the assisted decision making bracket capacity bill that's been updated, and we understand, we believe that enshrines the right of people to make advanced healthcare directives. There are also 3 different levels of support with decision making enshrined in the bill, and it's set up and has an act, has sort of commenced the whole process of the decision support service. So that's a department within a department that's going to be trying to ensure that people have there's 3 levels of support with decision making, all of which is supposed to reduce the notion of substitute decision making, i.e. somebody, which is really significant for us in mental health. And we were particularly focused on trying to ensure that advanced healthcare directives would be available and recognised and have some legal standing for people detained under mental health laws. So that was a long battle. In fact, that piece of legislation was going through our houses of the Oireachtas. We're over 12 years advocating on this, and finally the bill was passed while I was working for the Centre for Disability Law and Policy. But then it had to be amended to make it more compliant with the CRPD. And that, so we have a really complicated piece of legislation now that, as I said, was just passed or updated or amended last night, and the decision support service will now be able to kick off. At the same time, and over the same period, they were also trying to update the mental health bills, but unfortunately they were being drafted and worked on by 2 separate departments, and often there wasn't communication between the 2 of them. So now it looks like we will have mental health, and we had to fight very hard through communicating with the media, partnered up with academics in the Centre for Disability Law and Policy, especially around the assisted decision-making bill. You know, they kind of spearheaded and led a civil society coalition to try and influence all of the, you can imagine over 12 years, we've had an awful lot of different changes of government, changes of civil servants. We've had to kind of bring them along with us, get to know them and start trying to make sure that they understood the perspective of people with lived experience, because there was very strong lobbies on the other side. We have the College of Psychiatrists, and we have all of the representative bodies for the, you know, professionals involved in mental health services, and so we've had we would have worked alongside all of the academics, and then lately, in terms of the mental health bill, we've been working with some human rights lawyers who have a particular interest in mental health, and they've been working with us on especially writing to newspapers and lobbying TD. So anyway, but I think one of the points that is very difficult for us is that sometimes I could do the work when I was working with them. Sometimes I wasn't available at all to do anything. But the rest of the group who have stuck by this process have all been doing this voluntarily out of their own resources. Two of our members even went and funded themselves to do the masters in disability law policy in NUIG out of their own pocket. So I think the CRPD has been really critical for us. But we've also been on the edge of Europe. We've also been battling against the Oviedo Convention. Oh, and we've also had to try and our government, when the Irish government, when they were one of the first to sign the CRPD, but one of the last in the world, certainly in Europe, to ratify it. But they ratified it with the optional, you know, with the reservation about the optional protocol. So we've been trying to raise awareness of the option, you know, the difficulty with the optional protocol. And most recently in the debates in the houses of the Oireachtas, our parliament, people have begun to call for the deletion of, or the, you know, revoking, whatever the word is for the, and the optional protocol, so that we can maybe work with it. So we've been, you know.
So yeah, thank you for that introduction, Liz. Now the Spotlight interview is based on our thematic area of access to justice for persons with psychosocial disabilities. As you mentioned, but Ireland has declared a reservation on Article 12 of CRPD after ratifying the convention. So could you please tell us how this affects the persons with psychosocial disabilities and their ability to fully exercise all their rights?
Well, I think it's really significant because one of the most powerful aspects, I believe, of the, well, I think here I'm stumbling. Maybe stop it. Let me just think about it. You see, I think Article 12, the reservation that the Irish government has put in place means that we feel we can't take any case beyond the Irish court system. So that therefore it does restrict access to justice. We don't have a system or tradition of law where we can take case, you know, sort of collective cases. So there needs to be an individual who will take a case. And taking a case, you know, has huge consequences, because once a person has taken, you know, you need somebody who has, what's the word for it in legal term. It's like a, God, I can't remember. The word doesn't come to me. I think COVID is affecting the my brain. The strategic litigation. I mean, we need for somebody who's able to have a very good case that is winnable. So access to justice. First, there's so many barriers to it for people who are at the wrong end of the mental health system. First, you've got to fight your own internalized stigmatization, where you think that the professionals are right, that you have a problem, that you need to be treated. You've got to get over that hurdle. Then you've got to get over the hurdle of the public stigma. So taking on the public persona of an identified mad person who is fighting the state is a huge challenge. And then if you think that the state is in this case, the ultimate arbitrator, well, then you want to fight, because especially in a country like Ireland, which is so small, everybody knows everybody eventually, like with a population of a couple of million, and with a massive diaspora, everybody does know somebody who knows somebody who, they say, what is it, 3 people in the world are separated by 4 or 5 degrees of separation. But in Ireland, we joke it's like 3 or 4 degrees of separation. And so the stigma is big. Families, especially, families that have a professional or middle class aspiration or status, they're not going to want to draw the public what's the word, opprobrium on themselves by having a publicly out identified service user, person with lived experience. Well, you wouldn't, I think access, One of our members of Recovery Access by Experience did take a judicial case review, had her case reviewed at the circuit court, her detention. But the judge very much sided with the system. And even though the doctor was found that had, if you like, rubber stamped to her detention against her will, and there were questions about the integrity of that individual doctor, so much so that in fact he was later struck off the medical register. But the judge in our case decided against her, sided with the system, with the with the consultant, who was actually even the staff nurses who were working under the consultant, who was temporarily in the hospital. She was, even the nurses could say it's not fair what's happening to you and it's not right. But when she believed it, she could win her case. But when she took it, even the judge. So I think I'm coming to the point that the judiciary really do need to be educated about mental health, because the thinking about, giving all power to an understanding or a belief that, there's a chemical imbalance or a brain imbalance or something around how one is in the brain, that they can, and that doctors have the answer. If that is the belief of, and it is the belief of this, of the, so the judiciary, or even the people who are involved with tribunals, they're trained by the Mental Health Commission, who are very much informed by the medical model. That would be our Irish, regulatory body for the mental health services. We have a monitoring body, the Irish IREC, which is the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. They're the Irish designated monitoring body. But we find also that they don't understand mental health. Even they don't necessarily understand rights for other people with other forms of impairments, because we've joined up forces with across disability DPO, and recently we had a discussion. We find that maybe it's because the scope of that monetary body is too wide. It's to cover the equality legislation as well as human rights legislation, and yeah, it should work seamlessly if people understand, fundamentally, deeply understand the hidden disability, the hidden discrimination against people. But unless it's spelled out, and because even I would see that in other forms of discrimination and oppression, like racism, we talk about the need to have an understanding and awareness of unconscious bias that is inherent in how, as white people say, we have, well, yeah, we have this invisible privilege that is, unless you're challenged on it, it's an unconscious bias operates really keenly in lots of ways where people are living in oppressive systems. I think one thing that's really significant in understanding the Irish context and is that we have what people refer to an architecture of confinement. When the state was, we're not even sure exactly when the state was established because it kind of merged into what it is now. But in the 1950s, in this state, we had more people detained in places of confinement than even in the Soviet Union at that time. So it was really significant. So anyone who was a problem to good Catholic Ireland were locked up. So we had, now people are beginning to understand the legacy of that, where women's or people who in other ways didn't conform with good Catholic morality and middle class standards were kind of put way out of sight and forgotten about. So the one institution that, so a lot of attention is recently in our media on the Catholic Church's role and the other church to some extent, other Christian churches, their roles in sort of confinement of people, the institutionalization. I think this is where it's really interesting, because with the deinstitutionalization guidelines, we're now beginning to really think about our past relationship to these institutions and how people have been affected and the legacy of them. But the one, if you like, system of the state that hasn't really been examined under that lens has been the psychiatric, the old asylums, the old psychiatric asylums. There's a lot of talk recently about the need for redress for women who are seriously damaged by the mother and baby homes. They've come to media attention, but the one area that hasn't been examined yet is the institutionalization that has occurred under the mental health laws. And one could be cynical and think that the Irish government put the reservation in order to block many of us who have cases for the damage that institutionalization has done to our lives. Because already they're facing massive bills for, women and children who are illegally adopted out of the mother and baby homes, or that died in them. So, and it was the church, very much the church had those roles, a significant role in that. But in Ireland, it was only the state who was running the institutions, the psychiatric asylums. So one could think that some smart civil servant pointed out the liability that the church, that the state will have, taking out the middlemen of the church. Yeah, so maybe that's actually something that's just occurred to me. Perhaps I'm going to be liable if this is published. But I think it'd be good to wait until we actually make them rescind that revocation or take back that reservation before this goes out, because there is huge legacy of damage and hurt and harm. The side effects, that people who've been treated, as our friend Rosie. And Rosie is public about her experience, even in our efforts to try and educate the mental health, the College of Psychiatrists. I mean, we're engaging in debates with all of these people, and we are all volunteers. I've had work posts along the way that have helped me, fund paid bills but not currently. So I think I need to finish that answer to that question there.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for the response and also for telling us about the situation in Ireland in details. Moving on to the last question in this series, could you please tell us what advocacy and works have you been pursuing to oppose this reservation on Article 12 of the CRPD by Ireland?
We're beginning. We haven't done that much on it because, as I mentioned earlier, we've been very focused on advanced healthcare directives, offering people some hope that they can have some control over how they will be treated, even if it's specifically to say what one doesn't want. You can never say what you want in an advance. You can't be sure you'll get what you ask for, but what you can say is refusal of treatment. So it's really significant that advanced healthcare directives are going to have legal standing where we can say what didn't work for us in the past and we don't want again. In terms of the dropping the protocol, we need to begin to work harder on that. Now that we've succeeded with the having advanced healthcare, the promise that advanced healthcare directives will be recognised, because remember I mentioned there's two different departments working on two pieces of the legislation. So the last piece now will be the mental health bill, which is going to be updated. And we were promised by the minister of the last government, which is actually going to change at the coming weekend. So we're going to have another minister to deal with. We don't know if we'll have the same minister for mental health to make sure that we hold on to the small win around advanced healthcare directives. They can be, at the stroke of a pen, be lost. So we will need to we'll need to start thinking strategically about how we get the government to drop, to remove the reservation they've placed. Some of our politicians have begun asking for it. Recently, we participated in a process of reviewing of the legislative scrutiny for the mental health bill, and that report from a committee of the House of the Oireachtas has actually said that the government needs to remove the reservation. We've heard some soundings from some ministers that they are willing to consider doing that. The fact that they have, we've been working on other UN human rights bodies like the OPCAT, because sometimes, say to get psychiatric institutions recognized, or any segregated setting, as an institution that can be considered under the OPCAT protocol. So we've been working, if you like, because it's so recent, it's 2 years, like the Irish government have had their initial review by the committee. So we would be making submissions to the UN bodies and putting in the need to remove the reservation. So that is work we have to do. Come back to us in 5 years' time and ask what we've done, have we succeeded. We're beginning to hear people speak about it, but and especially we're going to join. We're in the process of joining up forces with the European Network of Users and Survivors, who are particularly focused on making sure that the Oveda protocol doesn't get included. And that's been a very, very interesting process, because the Oveda protocol really relies on the old principles of mental illness. So until we get them to remove the protocol, so with the protocol, sometimes the only route has been to the European Court of Human Rights. But if that European Court of Human Rights isn't very progressive towards the kind of thinking that is now, international best standards around rights of people with psychosocial disabilities, we need to, we need to make sure that they take the UN conventions more seriously. I mean, there are people in civil service department who don't actually think that it has any protocol at all. It's just, well, it's, they get a bad report, but it doesn't mean anything. So we need to change that culture. And, more and more, there are more and more allies and advocates in the field. So I think the next step has been to try and share some of the knowledge and bring it down to the grassroots so that people are more au fait with the language. I mean, years ago, I wrote a chapter in a book and I called it, my title was Why We Need to Learn Legalese. And I think it's really important that we share the knowledge so that it's not just a handful of people with kind of detailed knowledge of this, but that we bring it down to grassroots. And, and I'm kind of excited about the potential of doing that next year and the year after. I mean, that's probably one thing I want to do next year is to introduce some MAD studies courses for people in communities, and the CRPD has to be part of it. So sorry if I'm waffling again, but I think there's much more that we need to do now that we've actually achieved, or we feel we're close to achieving more recognition for the rights of people with disabilities, psychosocial disabilities, in the mental health system, or under mental health legislation. So I think watch this space is what I'll say.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for giving us such clear and comprehensive responses. We thank you again. No, they were. We thank you again for giving us the time to do this interview and for telling us all about your work, and all the very best for all the tasks ahead. Thank you.